All right, macro students, here we go with Module 7, 7D, Banking and Money Creation. And we're working with the question here, what is the monetary role of banks? Now, this word monetary means like of or relating to money. So, relating to money. So that question is basically saying, like, what role do banks have in our money supply? What role do banks have when it comes to money in our economy? All right, so wrote here, banks are important. All right, so let's start out with our book's definition of what do banks do. Now, they give us this big old lengthy definition. A bank is a financial intermediary that uses liquid assets in the form of bank deposits to finance the illiquid investments of borrowers. So let's break that down and figure out what that actually means. So a bank is a financial intermediary. Financial means like has something to do with money. And intermediary like like that word intermediate, it's like the middle one, right? Like intermediate algebra, it means that it's like the algebra class that's between the first algebra class you take and the hardest class, like it's in the middle. So an intermediary is like a what we call a go between. It goes between so a go between means like it goes between the lenders, the people who want to borrow money, excuse me, the lenders, the people who want to lend money to loan it out to people, and then the borrowers, the people who want to borrow the money and take the loan. All right, so it's a go between lenders and borrowers. And we know a little bit about that already because we've already talked about the fact that when we put money in the bank, they're going to loan that money out to other people. So that means that me putting money in my checking account or in my savings account, that's me being the lender and then letting someone else borrow that money. Crazy, huh? All right. So a bank is a money, like a go between for money between the lenders and the borrowers that uses liquid assets. Now, remember, when we say it's liquid, that means it is spendable money, money that's actually able to be spent. It's not tied up, as they say, tied up in a house or a building. It's ready to be spent. All right, so that uses liquid assets. Now remember, an asset is something of value that someone has. So something of value in the form of bank deposits. So bank deposits, that would be people's money that they put in the bank. And there's two big types of bank deposits, the checkable deposits or checking accounts and savings accounts. To finance means to help pay for, to finance or to pay for. Like if you take out a loan on your car, it's said that you have financed your car. So to finance means to pay for or especially to lend money to. The illiquid of investments. So remember, liquid is like spendable money. Well, illiquid is an asset that's not spendable. So illiquid investments, that would be how, whenever anyone gets that liquid money, they're going to use that, if they take out a loan, they're going to use that liquid money to immediately put it into something that's illiquid, like to buy a house, to buy a car. If it's a business, they might be to build a new factory or to build a new store. So the illiquid investments create more physical capital. So, you might want to define what that means. If you forgot, that would be like buildings, vehicles, things like that. All right, of borrowers. So we have a bank is a money go between lenders and borrowers that uses spendable liquid money or assets in the form of bank deposits, money people put in the bank, to finance or pay for or lend money to for borrowers to create more physical capital. So that means that banks, they take the savers, the lenders, the people who are putting their money in the bank, and they match them up with the people who want to take out the loans and spend that loan money on physical capital. So that bank, they're just, instead of, me, if I was like, hey, I have $1,000 and I don't want to spend it right now, I want to save it. So who wants to borrow it from me? Anybody? Anybody? Right? The bank does that for us. All right. So here at the bottom of the page, when we think of how banks work, right? So each arrow on here represents money. So money goes from people and firms to the banks. And it goes from people and firms in the form of checkable deposits or checking accounts. And in the form of savings accounts, which there are a few different types of those. And they put that money in the bank. Now it says here the bank keeps some of the money, and we're going to talk more about that later, but then the money that they keep a little bit of it, but then the rest of it goes out in loans. And then back to people and firms. And then money comes back from those loans in the form of interest payments. Interest payments on the loans. Now, there are a few other arrows that are missing from this simple diagram. It doesn't have everything on it. It doesn't have the fact that banks do pay some amount of interest to people from their savings accounts, so we could have another arrow going that way, but that's okay. We're just keeping it simple here. All right, page 2. All right, so I just mentioned to you that banks loan out a lot of money, but they don't loan out all of their money. They have to keep some of their money in what are called reserves, bank reserves, the money that banks keep and do not lend out. All right, now, any money that I have is going to be in like 2 places. One, it's going to be like cash that I have in my purse, or 2, it's going to be in my bank account at the bank, right? So the way, there's more to it than that, but like that, that's really simple, right? Like, where do I keep my money? I got some in my purse, I got some in the bank. Okay, well, banks are the same way, except they don't carry purses or wallets. They have a vault, right? A vault is that big room with like the really big door that's really hard to break into. And so they have some cash in their vault, just like I have some cash in my purse. And then banks have a bank account with the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is this part of the government that is kind of like the bank's bank, and they're also in charge of our money supply, and we're going to talk more about them in a different module. All right, so why do banks why do they keep reserves? Like, why don't they just loan out all that money? Well, because, if I put my money in the bank, it's still my money. I still want my money whenever I want it, right? So if I go to the store and spend my money, that money better be in the bank to transfer over to the store's bank account. If I go to the bank and I'm like, hey, give me some cash, they better have some cash to give me, right? So they have to have some money around for us to be able to do that. So basically, why do they keep money in reserves is to give money back to people when they ask for it. So the bank needs to keep enough money around that when people are like, hey, give me my money back, they can do that. Now, they don't keep all of our money though. Like we said, it's not just like sitting in a room somewhere. They are loaning that money out. So, and they're able to do that because not everybody goes at the same time and says, hey, I want my money back. They, have kind of figured out what percentage of that money that people have in the bank will be asked will be asked for at any given time, and so they'll have enough on hand to be able to give it to people. All right, well, how much do they keep in the reserves? Well, the Federal Reserve, which we'll talk more about later, sets a percentage of deposits. So it's called the required reserve ratio. Required reserve ratio. Okay, and we abbreviate that R, two lowercase r's. Now, ratio means it's a percentage, and required means they must do it. And reserves, notice up here, we use that word reserves. Why do banks keep reserves? And we set up here reserves as the money that banks keep and they do not lend out. So required reserve ratio is the percentage of the money that the bank has from people that they are required to keep and not lend out. So why does the Federal Reserve make those rules? So regulate means to make rules. Why do they do that? Well, to avoid what are called a bank run. Now, you probably don't know what a bank run is, and that's awesome because we don't have bank runs in the United States anymore. We did have bank runs during the Great Depression, and what that meant is that the people who had their money in the bank, they lost confidence in that bank. They lost trust that that bank would have their money when they went and asked for it, because people knew the bank isn't just hanging on to my money. They knew that they were lending it out. And so when the economy went to crap during the Great Depression, people lost confidence in the banks and they're like, oh my God, I need to go get my money out of the bank right now. Well, if everybody goes to the bank at the exact same time and they want to get their money out, that money isn't there. Only 10% of that money is there, and the rest has been loaned out. And if you think about it for a while, that can make you really nervous, right? Oh boy, where's my money? Right? We work hard for our money and we work hard to save some of our money. And if we have saved some of our money, we don't want the bank to lose it, right? So they make them hang on to some of the money so that when people go and say, hey, I want my money back, there's enough there to satisfy that. So a bank run is when everyone wants their money back at the same time. Wants their money back from the bank. But that's not all they do to avoid bank runs. There are other things that they do, which we will talk about on page 3, but we're going to pause here and then we'll do a part 2 of our video.